we find ourselves in has given us a lot of opportunities for acts of kindness and generosity in our community, in our friends, and towards our family. And there's a story in Buddhism that talks about 3 kinds of gifts that we can give one another. The first is the gift of material things, of stuff, so that we have enough of what we need. So if somebody's hungry, we want to give them food. We give the basics of life so that we have enough. And the second gift that we can give is the gift of know-how, of knowledge. And this can set people free. So although we can give people what they need, we can give them food, we can give them shelter, it's also good to give them dignity and independence. And if we give them know-how, then they can eventually have those things for themselves. And I'm just being told to speak a bit louder, apologies. So the third gift, when somebody has enough things, conditions for their life to be safe and secure, and then they have enough knowledge and understanding to live an independent life, to provide themselves with what they need, then the third gift is non-fear. And this is considered to be the greatest gift of all. And the gift of non-fear allows somebody to be confident in the world, to be confident to learn and grow and be their authentic selves. Fear is something that can make us feel somewhat contracted, tight in our bodies, contracted in our emotion, and restricted in our mind. And non-fear is something that can allow us to have freedom, to have peace of mind, to expand into the world, to really be ourselves, to hold our space. So non-fear is really a great gift that we can give to other people and that we can give to ourselves. So in order to work with non-fear, we also need to work with fear, because understanding our fear allows us to move towards non-fear. So how might we recognize fear? We can recognize it in our body. So we had a really wonderful, and thank you, Susanna, thank you for the relaxation this morning. We might recognize areas of tension in our body. And we might recognize in our mind that it's becoming critical or defensive. And being critical in our mind is a helpful thing in a time of immediate danger. So if we see a rock sliding down the hillside, it's very helpful to think in black and white. There's the rock, here am I, there's my safe way out. I run quickly in that direction. So seeing things very simplistically at times of fear is helpful, but obviously we're not always in immediate danger. And so having habit energies of being critical or defensive, if we feel fearful much of the time, can be less helpful in our normal lives. We might become aware of fear in our emotions. We may be numb. It may feel safer to feel nothing at all than to feel our strong emotions. Or we may be hypervigilant. Vigilance at times of immediate danger is useful, but ongoing hypervigilance is very tiring for our mind and for our bodies. We may recognize fear in our actions. We may be racing around. We may fill our diary and be busy from dawn till dusk so that we don't have to be with ourselves and perhaps with our fear. We may be acting out So unhelpful things may come from us, from places where we're hurting, and we may feel that we don't have a lot of control in these when they come out into our actions or our speaking. And we may play a role in life. We may hide behind a mask through a fear perhaps of not wanting to be seen for who we really are, for revealing our authentic selves. Perhaps we fear that we may not be accepted or that we might be judged if we reveal that. So meditation and deep relaxation can put us in contact with our fears. We can recognize our fears. And a helpful response when fear comes up might be, "Hello, my fear. Hello, my friend. It's you again. My familiar sense of fear. I know that you're trying to keep me safe. I know that you have my security at heart. I know that you have important information for me so that I can learn and grow. Let's sit down and have a cup of tea together, and I will try to calm myself down enough so that I can hear your important messages." But sometimes we don't respond to fear in that way. Sometimes we're afraid of fear itself, afraid of other strong emotions, afraid of the depth of our sadness, afraid of the heat of our anger. And so common responses that might occur when we recognize fear is that we might deny it. We may ignore it or suppress it. We might hide it from other people. We might distract ourselves from it. We might watch more telly because we don't want to be with our fear, whatever it is, of being busy. And these coping strategies that we commonly have one thing in common. They involve putting our attention out there, outside, externally often, so that we don't have to dwell within ourselves. But Rumi said that the cure for the pain is in the pain. And I think what he meant by that was that in order to move to a place of non-fear, of less suffering, it's helpful for us to become familiar, intimate, friends with our specific personal suffering. When the Buddha was enlightened, the first thing that we're told that he taught, the first noble truth, was there is suffering. And I don't think he was saying that for us to know intellectually that there is suffering, that suffering exists, but we don't need to worry about it. I think perhaps what he was saying was, there is personal suffering, there is my suffering, there is your suffering. And let's try and learn helpful and healthy ways to deal with our suffering, including our fear, because otherwise unhealthy and unhelpful coping strategies can arise, and those of themselves can create more suffering. So suffering isn't an abstract thing. And fear has value as a danger signal. Fear is trying to protect us and keep us safe. So fear is not something to reject or to be ashamed of. It's very much part of our sensitive human condition. But when we feel fear in the present moment, it doesn't mean that we are in immediate danger now. Because we might be remembering fear from the past. We might be reliving or rehearsing fear from when it happened in the past. Or we might be imagining fear in the future. Sometimes we're really good at telling stories about what might happen in the future, about how we might not be able to cope, or how fears might be bad then. And we can tell ourselves these stories. And there was a 16th century philosopher called Michel de Montaigne, and he said something like, my life is full of terrible misfortunes, most of which have never happened. And I think our stories can be like that. They can run into the future. And it's helpful to remember that we are the teller of those stories, but we are also the person listening to those stories. And the degree to which we want to believe our thoughts, identify with our thoughts, is really a choice for us. And the words that we use can be helpful. So rather than saying, I'm afraid, I'm fearful, we can say, I have fearful thoughts, or at this time, I am having fearful thoughts. And that can remind us that there are other times when we don't have fearful thoughts, and that we have other thoughts that are not fearful. We're not defined and overwhelmed by our strong emotions. I'd like to talk a little bit about attachment and how it can relate to fear. So attachment, other words can be grasping, clinging, holding on to, wanting to identify with. Attachment in fear it can be driven by fear. And perhaps we'll start with an example of we feel loving kindness towards someone. So when we feel loving kindness, we feel that that person is enough unto themselves. They are fine as they are. We don't have expectations of them. We don't make demands of them. We're happy that they're in our lives. We want them to grow and to develop and change in appropriate ways, and we want to support that. Sometimes loving kindness can move into attachment, and it's called a near cousin traditionally, a near enemy, the name for that relationship. It can be a subtle shift from loving kindness to attachment. And that can be driven by a fear of loss or separation. So rather than this person that we love, that we feel loving kindness for, then we can, rather than us both being very free, we can feel a sense of fear of loss or separation. And then we can have feelings of clinging or of wanting to control or limit that person, perhaps in very subtle ways. And then neither person is free. That person may feel restricted by our changing behavior, and we may feel fear around not wanting to lose them, about wanting to keep them fixed. So as well as with people, we can feel attachment or grasping to material things, or through experiences, even through experiences in meditation, we might be attached to. And these can be driven by fear of not having enough, fear of not being enough, or perhaps fear of not being accepted by the group. And we know that a rich and famous person living in a very big fancy house is not necessarily happy. But we can still get caught by the the imagination that if we lived in that big fancy house, then all of our suffering would disappear. But in reality, we know that having things around us, having material objects around us more and more, does not necessarily contribute to our happiness. And that happiness is more to do with how we see the world and how we befriend and transform our suffering, our fear, rather than what it is we have around us. And happy people are found in all walks of life and all degrees of income. And happy people, people who have some peace and freedom, have understanding that there are many conditions for happiness in the world, in our world, and in our present moment. It was very lovely hearing the sound of bird song during the meditation. We may appreciate the warmth of the sun on our skin, the laughter of a child, the embrace of a friend. That's a particular poignant one for me at the moment in times of lockdown. Our eyes in good condition to see shape and form and colour. These are really amazing things. I've been enjoying these lovely pansies that my dad grew. Many conditions for happiness. So there are some practices that can loosen our attachments and can nourish our freedom. So being consciously grateful can be helpful. I have a friend who does a gratitude practice every night when she goes to bed. She tries to think of at least 3 things that she's grateful for that day, and often has many more before she falls asleep. Making time to stop and appreciate the goodness and beauty that we have available to us in life. It's very easy to pass by, to rush through. Making consciously time to stop and recognize these things, to make sure we're nourished, to make sure our storeroom is full of good things, for when times, inevitably as they will, get tough. It's helpful for us to refrain from comparing ourselves with other people. This can engender fears and insecurities, especially not to compare the well-presented outside of other people with our very human and sometimes messy and complex insides. And reflecting on impermanence can be helpful. Reflecting that everything inevitably will change form, will pass away and rise again. And when we understand this, even a little, we can see that grasping at things, holding on to things that we hope are fixed and permanent, really has little help to us. So grasping and holding on to things can be driven by our fears. And I'd like to look also as attachment at this side, but on the other side, the opposite of attachment can be pushing things away, resisting things, not wanting to engage with things. And that sort of rejection can also be driven by fear. So if we're feeling resistance in ourselves, we may want to look and see whether we are experiencing a fear of experiencing something. Sometimes we only want a selective experience of the world. We just want the good bits. And we don't want what we perceive to be the bad bits. We're labeling good and bad in our minds. So we might want the fun and the companionship and the exercise of owning a dog. But we might not want the dog hair all over our house and the financial burden and going for a walk every day, even if it's raining. And it's really interesting sometimes to think of areas in our life that we really feel comfortable. So say it can be an area of our hobbies, or of our work life, or of our personal life, or of the chores that we do day in, day out. So maybe we feel very comfortable with cooking, or if we use gardening as an example. So if we feel very comfortable with gardening, we really enjoy the flowers, we enjoy being outside, but we also understand that weeds grow. We enjoy growing fresh vegetables, but we understand that rabbits come and eat them sometimes. And areas in our life where we feel very comfortable and at home are often areas where we completely accept what's going on there, all aspects. We know that gardening is hard work, but we also enjoy the fruits and the benefits. We accept the one and the other, and all of the complex shades in between. So if we feel that we are resisting or rejecting some area in our lives, it's really helpful to see what that's about, what it is we're not accepting. And often we can identify fears there, fears of all sorts of things that it's helpful to explore. And difference and unfamiliarity can bring up fears in us, fears of not being with the familiar. It can cause us to cling to our group, our tribe, our family. And this can also be the basis of lots of isms, so nationalism, sexism, racism. And this kind of polarized view can be based on fear. We may seek to diminish things that we don't understand by harshness and criticism. And this can also be based on fear. And so learning to look at our judgments and our dislikes when we're resisting things can be very liberating. It can teach us about our edges, the edge of what is our ability to accept things. And impermanence has been defined as the total, sorry, I got hiccups, the total acceptance of all that is. And so looking at our resistance to accepting things can be very helpful. And non-fear allows us to be comfortable with diversity, curious about the world around us, inclusive, flexible with constant change. And we know that rejection of things, resisting things, denying things is ultimately futile, because we are deeply connected to each other. We've heard people talk about being part of that web of life today. And we are deeply connected, and that means that we can experience a feeling of solidity and freedom based on that connection, and know that we're not separated or isolated. I think we can enjoy a sound of the bell here. So when we think about our mind and our mind consciousness, then we can think about it as a living room on top. This is our mind consciousness. And there's a storeroom underneath. This is our store consciousness. And we use the analogy of a living room on top because this is where we spend a lot of our time. And how the living room is, how it is to be in there, the sort of environment that we have, really can set the tone for our experience of our lives. In the store consciousness, underneath, is a lot of the potentiality that we have. All of the things that might come up into the living room of our experience, into our mind consciousness. And the things that we think, the things that we do, can water these potentialities and allow them to come up and perfuse the atmosphere up in our mind consciousness, in that living room of our mind, our awareness. So if we're aware of fear up here in the living room, we know that fear is at its most active and creative and energetic when it's dark in the living room and cold and no one is at home to take good care of things. So it's really good to turn on the lights. Fear isn't so powerful and so all pervasive when the lights are shining. And mindfulness is a really good type of light to switch on. With mindfulness, we can pay attention to our fear. We can stay in the present moment in a non-judgmental way. And fear is very much part of us. We don't want to be in conflict with it. But we just want to stay steady and present. And we can embrace our fear with the energy of mindfulness that we have within us. And embracing that fear with mindfulness can allow it to settle, to calm, and can allow us to understand it better. We can use our conscious breathing as an anchor to allow us to stay. Now, there are two ways that we can work with our fear. We can be aware that it's already arisen in our mind, and we can generate some of that energy of mindfulness to keep it company, to be with it, to try and understand. Just to be present initially is enough. The second way that we can work with our fear is that when we are feeling grounded and steady, when we are present, when we feel connected and solid, then we can invite fear to come up into our mind consciousness, to sit with us and drink tea in the living room. And it's really helpful just to start with a small fear, a little fear that doesn't trigger much reaction in our body and mind, but is a genuine, authentic concern for us. And that way we can practice with sitting with our mindfulness and our fear, and look maybe at what thoughts and feelings and actions are continuing to encourage this fear to be there, and what we might be able to imaginatively and skillfully do to encourage it to go back and rest in the soul consciousness. And it's really helpful to do those things in our meditation when we are in a good state. Sometimes in our meditation we get into a good state and we just have to stay there. But let's make good use of that. Let's not cling to those times. Let's help ourselves by just looking a little at our strong emotions and feeling more free around them, being less fearful of fear. So we've turned on the lights with mindfulness in the living room. We're illuminating that space with a non-judgmental awareness, and we're staying present and very honest to what is our experience. So now it's time to turn on the warmth. It's great to bring compassion to the situation. The literal meaning of compassion is to suffer with. Compassion is something that allows our heart to vibrate when we see suffering. And so when we see our own suffering, let's be compassionate to ourselves. Let's be willing to really be there with ourselves, to stay home when we feel fearful and take care. And not in an indulgent or a pitying way, because being a victim or a martyr are not helpful here, but with unconditional friendliness for ourselves and perhaps a little humour along the way. It's really helpful that understanding and compassion go together. If we only have understanding, then we can know what to do, but we don't necessarily have the caring energy to do it. Compassion brings great energy with it. If we only have compassion, then we may want to do the right thing, but we don't know what to do, and we don't necessarily act skillfully. So understanding and compassion always go best together. And there are some things that can allow us to stay with ourselves, with our fear, longer. Recognizing our sense of connectedness in the world is very helpful, and we saw that in the guided meditation. We are not separate or alone. Coronavirus has shown us this big time. We really are connected to every other human being on this planet, and to the bats and the pangolins. Coming back to the present moment can be very helpful. Our fear is often based on remembering the past or imagining the future. Staying in the present, grounding ourselves in the present, can free us from that. Resting regularly and consciously is practice. Taking time to do that. It's different from sleep or from zoning out. Sleep is also very helpful, but rest is different. Checking in with ourselves, having experienced to know what it is to be conscious and resting, at ease in our body and mind, is a useful resource for us when things get tough. Staying with the first thought is discipline. The stories of fear that we tell ourselves, running often into the future, we can just stay with the first thought. Just have that discipline. I am hungry. Doesn't mean I'll never eat again. So if we have freedom and non-fear, then this allows us to be comfortable and present with uncertainty and impermanence. We have more fluidity and we're more porous in the world. We're not defined by our thoughts. And it's really helpful to remember that everything that we do that moves us in a direction from fear to non-fear in our personal life, we don't just do for ourselves, but we do for the world. I'd like to finish here with a poem by a lady called Marianne Williamson, who's an American thinker, and she's a Christian, and so God is mentioned in the poem as well. The poem is called Our Deepest Fear. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We are all born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.